You're listening to international investment advisor Doug Goldstein on the Goldstein on Gelt show, the financial show where we'll talk about how you can make the most of your money. With all the confusing financial chatter bombarding you each and every day, Goldstein on Gelt will give you the practical information you want and need about living a financially stable life. Here's your host, money maven Doug Goldstein.
We are back. We are going to be talking today about the OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, to which Israel was just welcomed as a new member along with Chile, Estonia, and Slovenia. The OECD's goal is to create a stronger, cleaner, and fairer world economy. And the organization provides a setting where governments can compare policy experiences, they can seek answers to common problems, identify good practices, as well as coordinate domestic and international policies. So here on the line with us today is Dr. Ohad Bar Efrat, who is the head of international affairs at the Bank of Israel, and he is very, very much responsible for Israel's membership and the whole membership process into the OECD on behalf of the Bank of Israel. So first of all, I would like to welcome you, Dr. Bar Efrat.
Thank you very much, Doug.
And maybe the first question that I'd like to ask is a little general in nature, which is, who is the OECD and why is it important for Israel to be a member? I understand we've been trying for many, many years to get accepted, and now we've been recognized.
Yes, indeed, the OECD is a very important organization, and we're very happy that after a long process of trying to become a full member of the organization, we now know that Israel is an important part of this organization, the OECD. You know, the countries of the OECD produce more than 60% of the global output. The important countries in the world are members of the OECD. Many of them are members of the OECD. And this will be very good for Israel, for policymakers in Israel, to exchange views and to try to achieve the high standards that the OECD requires from member countries and that the OECD recommends to member countries.
And it's taken a long time to get to this point?
Well, since the early 90s, Israel has been very active in the OECD. As you know, Israel does not have a natural group of countries to which it belongs. Like the European countries, they have the EU, or some other countries have the region that they are very active in, and there is a lot of regional cooperation. But Israel trades a lot with countries that are far away. About the exports of Israel are a third, or about a third to the US, about a third to Europe, about a third to Asia. And it's very important for Israel to belong to an organization in which one can exchange views about the global economic situation.
When we talk about exchanging views, like, for example, I'm a financial advisor, and when I want to exchange views with other advisors, I go to a conference or a meeting. Tachlis, what does that mean for Israel? Who here is interacting on behalf of Israel with the OECD?
The important part of the OECD is that many people in Israel interact with the OECD, and many more will interact with the OECD across many government offices, because the OECD doesn't deal only with macroeconomic stability or with the liberalization of the capital account or with macroeconomic phenomena, but it also looks in depth in various issues that have to do with the business environment, with the population and its participation in the labor force, with education, with quality of the environmental policy. So in many Israeli ministries now, good and important contacts will be made with the counterparts in the various OECD countries in order to learn about policies that are successful there, and also to reflect on policies that have been very beneficial for Israel.
I see. So this is all on the governmental level as opposed to at the business level, meaning it's not like a chamber of commerce.
Yes, that's right. Although business leaders as well as unions do interact as part of the OECD. The OECD makes a special point to approach the public in general, but the meetings, and there are over 200 committees in the OECD, are mostly for government officials.
I understand. When I made Aliyah about 16 years ago, and in fact I was dealing in the international business world as well, and from time to time I did experience people questioning the Israeli banking practices, and they felt that maybe things were not as kosher as they would like. And in fact, even once I was told, they said, well, you're not like at the level of an OECD country. So obviously that's changed, or maybe that was just a misperception then. But how did Israel change in order to show the world that we were really a first world economy?
Well, it is a long process, as you know, of economic policy making that has to do with stabilization, because one cannot open up the economy unless stability is achieved beforehand. And in 1977, Israel had an attempt to liberalize the economy when the macroeconomic conditions were not ripe for this. And that resulted in a retreat from that liberalization. But in the early 90s, Israel followed the stabilization plan. In the early 90s, Israel followed the liberalization plan following the stabilization of 1985. And then the economy was ready for it. And gradually, the economy was opened up, practices were improved, and the situation today is far better than it was a few decades ago.
Mm-hmm. So as a result of some of the liberalization and the opening up of the economy, is the path now being opened for example, foreign banks to open in Israel and to compete on the retail level? I know that, in walking in downtown Tel Aviv or Jerusalem, you don't see a big Citibank or HSBC sign as you would in other countries.
There are no limits to other banks as long as they are sound and they have sufficient capital and they can provide good services to receive licenses from the Bank of Israel to operate in Israel. This is important as part of Israeli policy in order to increase diversity in the capital markets as well as to increase competition in the banking sector. And the reason that some foreign banks find it more difficult to go into retail in Israel is that we have in Israel a fairly sophisticated banking sector, a fairly successful banking sector, and it's not easy for competitors to enter the field and to be profitable sufficiently like they are in some other countries. But we would like to encourage foreign banks, the good foreign banks, to come and to be active in Israel.
I see. So that is one of the goals of the Bank of Israel, to increase that level of competition?
Yes, indeed. Not only the Bank of Israel, it's also the government that tries to improve the services in the financial markets, the competition in the financial markets, in addition, obviously, to the soundness of the banking system. And by the way, one of the reasons that Israel has been so resilient during the last financial crisis, the global financial crisis, that did not reach Israel in an extent that it has affected some other countries in the world, is that the banking sector is a sound banking sector, and we have in the Bank of Israel a supervisor of banks who is very respectful and active in order to assure that the stability remains.
Mm-hmm. We are speaking with the head of international affairs of the Bank of Israel, Dr. Ohad bar Efrat, who was responsible for Israel's membership process in the OECD. We're almost out of time, but I just want to ask a question about what happened recently in Greece. Greece is a member of the OECD, and yet it really turned sour, to put it mildly. Does membership in the OECD protect people from that? How are we supposed to understand what happened there?
Well, this is a good question because sometimes one reaches some kind of a goal or a target and invests, and this is not for the benefit of the country. The situation in Greece is a relatively simple crisis in the sense that the government ran too big fiscal deficits, the debt of Greece increased too much, And without the correction, the financial markets lost faith in the Greek economy. In the past, many other countries had such crises. Israel also unfortunately experienced a crisis that resulted from too much debt. And obviously belonging to an international institution like the OECD, for example, does not prevent a crisis. It allows the country to be more aware of its policies, but it's not a guarantee of continuing with the correct policies. Now, in the Greek situation, because they're part of the Eurozone and they have the same currency as some other countries, they didn't experience a depreciation of the currency like other countries that would not be part of the Eurozone. So they missed some of the market signals when they entered into the problem. In addition, they could raise debt relatively cheaply as a result of being an EU member. So there were some problems which were specific to the structure in which the Greek were part of the global system. But obviously in Israel what we would like is to further improve our policies and to understand that when one runs economic policy, one can do it relative to the past, relative to some future expectations, or relative to other countries. The OECD has some excellent statistics about other countries, which makes it possible for a country to achieve goals where it wants to stand in the global setting.
I see. Well, I must say you really explained quite a bit on the radio to all of our listeners. Dr. Ohad Bar Efrat, who is the head of international affairs at the Bank of Israel and was responsible for the membership process of Israel into the OECD. And I also just want to say thank you very much, because you must have worked very, very hard to get to this level. And sometimes I understand that people in the Bank of Israel don't get the thanks that they deserve for really going out, and I'm sure it's not just filling in forms, but it's a huge amount of travel and commitment, which now has brought Israel really into the forefront in the world economy. And I would like to thank you for joining us on the Rusty Mike radio station on the Goldstein on Gelt show.
Thank you very much, Doug. Indeed, it gives us a lot of satisfaction.
Okay, and I wish you best of luck in the future. Thanks again.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye now.
You've been listening to the Goldstein on Gelt show with money maven Doug Goldstein. Doug's weekly radio show is heard around the world, but if you miss it, you can download the podcast at www.goldsteinongelt.com. The Goldstein on Gelt show gives you up-to-date financial ideas so you can get on the path to financial freedom. If you'd like your questions answered on the air or off, send Doug an email to doug@profile-financial.com. It's your money for your future, so join Doug every week to build your wealth on the Goldstein on Gelt show.